Hello and welcome. This is Eagle Eye 621, and today we're going to be talking about the best enchantments you can get for your weapons. As you can tell, we're back in my armor testing world, where we also did a video on the best enchantments you can get for your tools, which I will have in the iCards right now. This video is about the weapons, and you can check the description to jump ahead to the different weapons if you would like to skip. Let's start out with the sword. And this is our crafting recipe. And you can put a bunch of different things on your swords. Starting from the top, your mending and unbreaking 3, along with your sweeping edge, which allows you to attack more than one enemy at a time. Then you will have to choose between your Bane of Arthropods, your Sharpness 5, or your Smite 5. You can only have one of these on your sword. Then you can also add your looting. You can then add knockback, either 1 or 2. And you can also add fire aspect. There is a 1 to this as well, but if you want to light things on fire, chances are you want them to be on fire for longer, so you want to have your fire aspect 2. Now, as for your perfect sword, there are actually a couple of different choices here. So this is what I carry around with me when I'm wandering through my world. It's your sweeping edge 3, looting 3, sharpness 5, unbreaking 3, and mending. I do not have the knockback or the fire aspect on it. And you can just have a completely maxed out sword that does have both that knockback 2 and your fire aspect 2, along with the other enchantments I have here. And this comes down to how you use your weapon. I use the sword as a short range weapon, but I also carry around with me a bow. And that means that if I'm dealing with something at a longer range, I'm going to want to use that bow instead. The problem you have with knockback and fire aspect is if you knock back a skeleton that's shooting at you, then you have to try and close the distance on it again, all the while it is shooting you, which is very irritating. And the problem with the fire aspect is if you don't knock them back, and I don't have the knockback because when I'm close to them I don't want to knock them back, then they're on fire and they can actually light you on fire. So if you're going to have the fire aspect, you are going to want to have your knockback on that as well, but I prefer to use my bow for longer ranges and just the sword for closer in combat. Now you're also going to want to have this guy right here. This is going to be your perfect sword for your XP grinder. So one of the problems that you have with your XP grinders that involve mobs like Endermen is that the Ender Pearls actually become a nuisance and a hassle. They start to clog up all of your hoppers, they overflow your chests, and they just sit there in your world causing unnecessary lag. It's a good idea to have a sword that, as you can see, does not have the looting on it at all to cut down on those ender pearls or other drops you're trying to get. Now clearly, if you're using your mob farm to also get those drops, you do want to put that looting back on the sword. But if you're using it just for your XP grinder and you already have enough drops and you don't want any more, then it's a good idea to have a version without it, so that'll cut down a bit on the lag while you're going through the process of getting your XP. You can see an iCard in your screen right now about an Enderman farm I made that still gets you 60,000 XP per hour, which is the maximum possible with Enderman. That does not have any risk of going over the void. I'll also throw in the iCards some of the furnace farms I do that you don't need to have mob farms. Now let's talk about the axe, which we did talk about with the tools, but this is more of the combat version, and this is going to be what you've seen before. You can have your mending and your unbreaking, as well as your efficiency. This is for its use as a tool, and then your silk touch or your fortune, again for the tool aspect. But what we care about is the Bane of Arthropods versus Sharpness versus Smite. And as you may remember from the last video, I picked the Smite 5 over the other two. Now, you can also have a Sharpness 5 as well, and I said in the last video that this depends upon the enemies that you're killing. Now, axes have a unique ability that you can one-shot an enemy with that Smite V. So we have a little bit of a testing setup back here. If I can switch back into survival mode with some zombie pigmen. Now I do have a sword with Smite V to show you why I do not bother with the sword with Smite V, but I do have, and let me clone this guy, why I do have this. So if we put a zombie pigman in there, standing still, that is not a crit attack, which you get by jumping up and hitting them before you land, just one shot, even standing still. That's not a fluke. That will happen every time. Now, while this does work for a zombie pigman, which is helpful because it won't aggro the rest of the zombie pigmen, it's also very useful for phantoms, which you can also one-shot the same idea. Now, for swords, and this is our Smite V sword, it's not a one-shot, it's a two-shot. Now, if you want to, you can, if you're better, you can crit them, and jumping will turn that into a one-shot. But what happens if we have 3 of these guys, and those are both babies, because obviously it's a test. If we try and do the crit, you can only crit one enemy at a time. Even though this has sweeping edge, it still only attacks one at a time. And the difference between two, just had to get rid of those guys. The difference between your normal sword and your Smite V sword is you can kill these in 2 instead of the 3rd swing that it will take. I don't think is enough to justify the drop in effectiveness against your non-undead mobs, such as creepers or now your illagers, since raids are a thing, as well as just the random patrols. So I don't bother with the smite on the sword, but I do think it is worth having on your axe, especially when you take this and you combine the two in your inventory, which is to say that when I'm walking around my world, I will have a sharpness 5 sword, and I will also have a smite 5 axe, just because I like to keep the different tools with me, and I think those two cover themselves very nicely. Now, the sharpness 5 does have a place in your inventory, especially if you're going PvP. That is, if you're attacking another player. The axe does do more damage than the sword does, although it takes a little bit longer for it to refresh, or essentially reload, because if you spam click, it doesn't do the same amount of damage, which you can see from the bar right here while I was doing that testing. When you swipe with a sword, and you do need to be in survival mode for this, and let's get some more of these guys. You can see that if you spam too quickly, it does take away from the power. So spam clicking is not effective, and if you want to do more damage against a person, you can do that with your sharpness 5. It'll also disable a shield for a while, which gives it some additional use. So there is a place in your world for that. On to our tridents. So again, we did this with the tools. We have 2 different types based on what you can have. You have your mending and your unbreaking 3, along with impaling 5, which means that these will do more damage. And then you need to decide between your riptide and your loyalty. And with your loyalty, you can also have the channeling on it, which causes a lightning strike in the rain. The answer here is really both. The riptide I use as more of a tool for transportation, and the trident I use while underwater. I happen to like the sword a lot better while on land if we're going close combat, and the bow a lot better for distance, but the trident travels underwater without being affected by the water, which makes it a very useful weapon if you're going to be doing a lot of work underwater. You're going to want to have one of these to throw. I don't like the Riptide as much because I find that you very often get hit by the enemy while you're moving towards them to impale them, and I would rather hit them with a sword or an axe to keep a little bit more of a range so they can't hit me back, or to just throw a trident at them. With regard to your bow, you have a couple of different choices. This is your crafting recipe. You can have your Unbreaking 3 on it, as well as Mending or Infinity. You do have to choose between one of these two. And then you can put your Power 5 on it to make it stronger, and you can put a Punch 1 or Punch 2 on it, and this will knock the enemies back. And then you can also put a Flame on it. Now, my choice is the Infinity. I like the Flame with the Power 5 and Unbreaking 3, as well as the Punch 1, and as I mentioned, that Infinity. Now, the Punch 1 I think is better because the Punch 2 makes them go a little bit too far back for my taste. The Punch 1 is enough to keep something like a creeper at bay without having to chase it down because of how far away it went. This is a little bit of a preference. I do prefer on the Punch 1, and I prefer that over not having any punch because, again, this is my distance weapon. I want to use it to keep things or other players at a distance. And then some people prefer the Mending over the Infinity. I like the Infinity because you don't have to carry around as many arrows to know that you'll still have a full inventory's worth of arrows because, again, that's what the Infinity does. It lets you continue to fire the same arrow over and over again. And by the time you can make these in your world, or if you're getting them from your AFK fish farms, it's a fairly straightforward process to make more without needing to worry about repairing it. And for my taste, just having unlimited arrows is better than not needing to worry about it breaking, because you'll see it's going to break long before it does, and you can either repair it or just get a new one. There is also a little bit of a sleeper option down here, and that is your flight or your troll bow. And this one is designed not to hurt people. That's why it does not have the power on it. It has Unbreaking 3 and Infinity. Again, Infinity is for the same reason as above. Some people prefer Mending. And it does have Punch 2. And before you could fly with rockets, you used to need to shoot yourself with arrows to get lift. Also, the troll in there is just to troll your friends without hurting them. Just make sure you don't knock them off of a very tall cliff or into a pool of lava, and you just send them flying around. As a little bit of an Easter egg, it used to be possible to have both Mending and Infinity. This was removed in version 1.11.1. If you do have any from your world because it's old enough, it will still work, but you haven't been able to make any more in quite a while. So these are going to be your two choices for your perfect bow if you're trying to make them right now. And again, Curse of Vanishing, which you can put on all of them. Don't put on any of them. And if you enchant and you end up with it, just start over with something new. Now, talking about the arrows, which you shoot from your bow, it will also affect your crossbow. This is your crafting recipe. It will make 4 of your regular arrows, but you actually have a lot of different variety of arrows, as you can see on the screen, roughly divided between good, bad, and depends. So you have your instant health. Now these are going to be your good arrows. You have strength, as well as strength 2, different amounts of time here. You have your speed. You have your water breathing. Missed a speed 2 over here. And then your regeneration and regeneration 2. Now obviously these are all beneficial tipped arrows. As for our neutral arrows, we have an arrow of slow falling. And depending on your situation, this could be very beneficial, or it can be just kind of annoying if you're trying to move around, especially if you don't have wings. Then this can get kind of irritating just trying to jump up and move around in your world. Your Arrow of Turtle Master, and you have two of these different versions, and it's kind of irritating because it does slow you down to basically stand still or a crawl, but it gives you some pretty tremendous resistance in a pinch, which can be very helpful. And then your Spectral Arrow, and this makes a glowing outline around whatever mob you shoot. And again, this is kind of a neutral. And then for bad or harmful, we have slowness and additional slowness, weaknesses, poison and poison 2, and we have instant damage. Now down here we have an Arrow of Luck, and you usually can't craft this. There are a couple of versions where this was craftable, but most of the time this is just something you can only get through creative. In order to craft these, the Spectral Arrow is made by 4 glowstone, and they go around it in a plus shape with the arrows in the middle, and a lingering effect of whatever the effect is you want will create this. You surround this potion on all sides, and that will give you 8 of whatever the effect is. You don't see these used a lot because the amount of time, as you can see, that they give you whatever the effect is not a lot. And if you're going to use these on yourself, it's usually better to just drink the potion or hit yourself with that splash potion. It's a little bit more, longer lasting and a little bit easier to do. But these are options in your world if you do want them. As for our crossbow, we have a couple of different choices. You can put Mending and Unbreaking 3 on them, as well as Quick Charge, and this does exactly what the name says. It allows you to charge your crossbow faster. You are going to want to go with the 3. There's no reason to put a 1 or a 2 on. If you have the 3, that's what you want. And then we need to make a decision between our Piercing enchantment or our Multi-Shot enchantment. Multi-Shot splits your arrow into 3, while the Piercing allows the arrow to go through more than one target. Each additional level of Piercing allows it to go through one additional target. So Piercing 1 can go through 2, Piercing 2 can go through 3, and so on and so forth. This is going to be your crafting recipe. You can get these in the world from killing certain illagers. And in terms of what's going to be the best, I think we kind of have a split here. We have your multi-shot version for when you want to deal with mobs that are spread out a bunch. We have your Piercing 4 version. This is for a little bit more of a precision. And then we also do have the version without either. And this is if you're operating somewhere sensitive, if you're inside your villager trader and you like your crossbow. You don't want the multi-shot because if there's one mob, then those other 2 arrows may go out and hit your villagers. Same thing for your Piercing. You don't want to have it go through the mob you're shooting at and hit one of your villagers. So depending on your situation, you may want to cycle through which of these are going to be your top choice. Now, crossbows can fire arrows, but they can also fire rockets, which give it an extra little bonus. And the way that you make explosive rockets, these are not rockets that you're going to use to fly or you will hurt yourself, is by making these firework stars. And you make them by combining gunpowder with any dye of your choice. It doesn't have to be white. And then to make the rockets themselves, you take a piece of paper with your gunpowder and stuff as many of these firework stars as you can. The more stars, the more damage you will do to whatever you hit, and that will give you 3 of these firework rockets. You can also do some interesting things with different effects and different shapes that you can make, but as far as combat is concerned, if you want to go maximum power, then you're just going to want to have these firework stars for as many slots as you can fill. and that being you have your 1 slot for gunpowder, your 1 slot for paper, and then you're going to want to fill the remaining 7 with your firework stars. These do explode on impact, and they will damage anything within range, so you also want to be careful that you're not too close, or that something you care about is not too close, or will get damaged as well. So now let's talk about them all a little bit faster for people that don't want to go through the longer explanation. We have our perfect sword, which is your sweeping edge 3, your looting 3, sharpness 5, unbreaking 3, and mending. This is going to be your perfect sword in combination if you keep a ranged weapon with you. If you don't, then you're going to want to add the knockback 2 and the fire aspect 2 on it just to clear things away from you, although you'll probably want to use this in conjunction with a shield as well to deal with some of the longer range mobs while you're trying to close that distance. You also are going to want to make your XP perfect sword, which is going to involve not having that looting 3 on it to not cause a buildup of items you don't need in your world while you're just trying to grind for that XP. For your Trident, you're going to want to have 2 of them here. Your Riptide 3 with Impaling 5, Unbreaking 3, and Mending, as well as a Loyalty with Channeling version, also Impaling 5 with Mending and Unbreaking. For your bow, you're going to want to have a Power 5 bow with Unbreaking 3, Flame, and Punched 1. And either you're going to want to put Mending on that or Infinity. As I said, I prefer Infinity, but this is a little bit of a preference for you. You also may want to have one of these around just for fun. You have rockets now, so you won't really need them to fly, but you can troll your friends with it in a very non-lethal way as long as you're careful about what you're knocking them into. And then for our crossbow, we're going to have Unbreaking 3, Quick Charge 3, and Mending. That's going to be more of your surgical crossbow. And then you can add multi-shot onto that if you're out in the world exploring and you want to be able to do damage to a bunch of different mobs in front of you that are next to each other. And instead of that multi-shot, you're going to want to use a piercing 4 if the mobs are more in a row as opposed to next to each other. Now, just as a little added bonus, if you're going to be using the explosive rockets, you're going to want to using your multi-shot here, because that will split that rocket into 3 and only cost you 1 in terms of how much it uses up from your inventory. So again, just going to cycle through this fast for people that want to take screenshots for the swords, as well as for your tridents, and then for the bows, and for the crossbows. If you found this video helpful, I would appreciate a like, and for more like this, be sure to subscribe. Thanks for stopping by.